Okay, so welcome. All right, so welcome, welcome to our continued conversation, hashtag Please Say Black series, which is created by me, Kina Reed, and is a part of our ongoing project alongside the Anti-Blackness Reader. So today we're so excited to continue this conversation. Our Please Say Black discussions have been a highly curated video series committed to centering Black storytelling, centering Black truth-telling, and furthering the dialogue on what Blackness means in our now. What does it mean to be Black today in 2020, amidst a global health pandemic, in the middle of a movement for our lives here globally? And so we are so excited today to say that we're continuing on. Our last video had Dr. Bedelia Richards with the Race Talk LLC, and we talked about what the terms POC and Black and African American mean. So check that out. You can find that on our Facebook page. But today, we have Lettie Shumate, all right, my new favorite. Lettie is a historian. She is an anti-racism educator. She is an advocate and creator of Sincerely Lettie podcast. And it's our favorite history podcast right now. And so we are so excited to have you, Lettie. Hi, Lettie.
Hey.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Lettie uses multiple platforms. I mean, she's out there, y'all. And it's all in service of centering Black voices, cultivating honest conversations about history. So you definitely need to check out her historical happenings, all while at the same time motivating us to take care of our Black authentic selves. She also collaborates with these amazing projects, Check Your Privilege, According to Reezy. And so Lettie is out there, and we are so excited that and humbled by the fact that she took time to be a part of our video series today. And so today, in honor of saying, Please Say Black, in honor of Black August, we welcome you to our little corner of the world, Lettie.
Thanks.
Right? So it's Black August, and we are centering Black resistance. And I just thought, initially when I decided, hey, we need to further this conversation, the first person I thought about was you. I recently started following your historical happenings that led me to your podcast, and my mind was like, because, I feel like I'm a bootleg historian.
Mm-hmm.
Bootleg because it is not my area of study, but at the same time, and I apologize for my dog, it is definitely something I'm in the process of learning. So before we start with my questions for you, there anything that you wanted to say to get us moving?
Yeah, I mean, really just that Black August has been left out of the history books because we hear about Black History Month, but we don't hear about Black August. And also with that, Black history is American history. So it's celebrated 365, 366, 24/7, right? So, but yeah, Black August is just really integral in seeing and understanding revolutionary freedom fighting Black people that are here now and our ancestors. So, yeah.
All right. I want to apologize for viewers. We are videoing Zoom from our homes. And my colleague and coworker is a dog named Sammy, who is all up in my business today. So I apologize profusely. So the first question that I want to talk about is, how has Black freedom fighting specifically shaped your life?
Yeah, I mean, specifically, I would really say just like first to start how I'm so moved by history all the time, and that in itself, like whenever I was getting my master's in history, which I got in 2015, I focused on American history, but I also like specialized in Black history and race studies. And so with that though, you have to learn global history as well. And you can't study American history, the truth, without constantly finding and studying freedom fighting. So really, the way that it's affected me directly is just my, like, how I view history and how I educate about it, and the people who I talk about, and the voices that have been brushed under the rug, that I'm like throwing the rug off, burning the rug, taking all this stuff from like underneath. But yeah, it's really affected my ability to see history beyond the whitewashed version that we've all gotten. I definitely didn't even like history growing up, not like it at all, believe it or not. And now here I am as like a historian, but it's because of stories about Black freedom fighters, right? It's like because I was in college and I learned about Nat Turner's Rebellion and really what freedom fighting means. I think people, yes, it's physically like being revolutionary, but freedom fighting and being revolutionary also comes with the conversation about Black resistance and the many forms of Black resistance. It's not just physical resistance, like protesting, right? Or rebellions and that kind of stuff. Resistance was also like enslaved Black women who were quilting, and they would quilt and show these paths on the quilts for like escape routes, right? For like freedom. So even that in itself was freedom fighting. But yeah, that's really a way to answer that question about specifically me. And I believe too, it's also just like I feel a deep connection to people in history, Black people in history. So whenever I read about Black people who were freedom fighters, right? Like Fred Hampton and I mean John Lewis, Ida B. Wells, like all of these Black people, they just inspire me to know that, like, yes, I'm going to always have to fight racism and white supremacy because that's what I'm convicted to do. But that conviction has a purpose, and just because it's not easy sometimes, right? It's exhausting. They show me that their fight was never in vain. It was always for a greater purpose. So, yeah.
It's so funny. You said so many things, and I was taking notes. Because I'm a forever learner. But like, even you talking about like the quilts, you know, I think I grew up in the South. We both grew up in the South. I went to school in Louisiana, so right there in the Bible Belt. And in the history classes I took that were taught by white people, you know, that is not to say that people who are not Black cannot communicate powerful messages about Black history.
Right.
But I remember that between the books and the actual teachers and then the content in the books, always feeling as though Black people weren't actively involved in liberation. And I mean, I remember this like feeling this like in 5th grade, 6th grade, kind of like those early primary grades. And then in 7th grade, I stumbled upon the autobiography of Malcolm X, and something changed for me. And that, again, I say stumbled because it wasn't brought into a classroom, right? None of my teachers were like, let's all read this book. It was sort of like, I went to a book fair or a garage sale. Honestly, Lettie, I don't remember how I got the book, okay? I just know I got the book and I read it, and it was like, whoa, a whole new world. It was like, whoa, Black people are like really, really about that life, you know? Because even when I learned about Harriet Tubman, it was very much a whitewashed version. It was like, you know, here's this Black lady named Moses. She figured out how to free herself. Like, it always makes us so passive, you know? Yeah. We could talk about Rosa Parks later, but I definitely think we need to even kind of broach that in the sense that a lot of times the way that Black people are framed in civic disobedience is a lot usually around a passivity. And for me, Black freedom fighting and finding out more about it is really about recognizing all of the ways we haven't been passive in the face of so much trauma. And so something like the quilts that you mentioned, it's like, whoa, like even the thing that might seem the most dormant is still so powerful and still has such a lasting legacy. So when we think about what Black freedom looks like, you know, from a historical place contemporarily, what does it look like for you? What are some of the actions? What are some of the words involved in fighting for our freedom?
Yeah, I mean, I immediately thought of, I mean, and I mentioned this earlier, but Nat Turner's rebellion. But even before that, there's this idea, right, with the transatlantic slave trade that, oh, well, they were forced on to the ships and that's just what they did. And then they got to America and they were just these meek and docile and afraid and whatever enslaved people. But that's really not what happened. There were quite a few rebellions on ships that carried stolen Africans, and that's way too often left out of the history books. And that in itself just shows like the early signs of resistance and early signs of organizing, even while you're at the bottom of this disease-ridden enslaved ship. You're still trying to fight for your freedom, even like, and many times that freedom meant you just sacrifice yourself. You just died. And but that's kind of stuff where I'm like, people really need to read more about that. And it's something that I didn't read more into until I was in graduate school. And I'm still reading a lot about it because I'm not an encyclopedia. I can't know everything, right? But yeah, so and then, you know, I think of Nat Turner's rebellion and how people hear about Nat Turner and they're like, oh, okay, well, he was just this enslaved Black man and he had visions from God. He led this rebellion, and that was it. No. That's not at all it. He was a preacher. He was, yes, he did. He talked to God a lot, which goes into a whole other conversation about how spirituality and stuff goes into and faith, right, went into freedom fighting for Black people and that strength,
yeah, for
that
sure.
higher power. Yeah,
it has to be like that divine connection.
Yes,
sure.
Yeah, definitely. And so think about that, and even how people talk about Nat Turner. I'm like, you aren't talking about what happened to him after, because afterwards, after he was killed, after his body was completely dismembered and all these things happened, people, they shifted his body around the country to like research him. And
Wait, I said what? Wait, let's see.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Lettie, you're gonna have to backtrack.
You're gonna
have to backtrack because this is my first hearing that.
Yeah. They would, so white people would want to know what in the brain made a Black person want to rebel. So they would do all these experiments. Yes. They had, and I forget the name of it. Oh man, I'm gonna have to look it up, and I should have looked it up for today. But there's a name, they had names for 2 different conditions. One condition was this condition that white people created. Black people,
wasn't it like Drapertopia or
Draper? It was something. Yeah. And then there's another one that I've seen, which was like basically where enslaved Black people wanted to like not obey the rules. It was like a different one. And I was like, y'all are really wild out here.
Like creating an entire new scientific concept.
Yeah.
But I just want to go back to that part. So you're saying that Nat Turner's body was sent to different places.
Yeah. So like, yeah. Yeah. And I forget exactly where, and I'm not sure which body parts. I know for sure his skull was.
Wow.
Yeah. So like,
that's just absolutely crazy.
Yep. And so that's And that's the thing, right? But then also with Nat Turner's rebellion, what's not talked about is the aftermath of that with other people who were enslaved, other Black people, and how that gave white people this reason to just, okay, well, we're just going to go around and just start making sure that we're going to send a message that no other enslaved people need to be doing this. And they would just kill random Black people just because. And I'm like, and that's the thing people leave out.
Yeah, because I think at that point, seeing a Black person utilize that much agency had to create a sense of fear amongst other plantation owners.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, right? We've got to remind the enslaved people where they are on this racial hierarchy, right?
Right.
And kind of going back to that question in terms of what does freedom fighting look like for me, especially now, it's like demystifying that racial hierarchy that was created, and often so many people and so many institutions work to maintain it. And so for me, it's like, no, this racial hierarchy with Black people being on the being at the bottom, excuse me, with Black people being on the bottom, we've got to see it for what it is and to dismantle it entirely. So for me, it's a lot about saying, hey, no, white people, you have racialized lives. Like, I'm not going to let anyone sit here and say, you know, what's the mythology of, oh, I don't see color, or, you know, we're all one human race. Well, maybe we are all one human race according to the creator, but according to these institutions, you know, according to these corporations, we have racialized lives. There is a racial hierarchy, and it must be dismantled, but it cannot be dismantled until we're honest about its existing. So
exactly.
Yeah, so I think that's a huge part of where we see so much work from brilliant people like you, anti-racist educators, who are just saying like, hey, this thing exists. For me and my work around anti-Blackness, you know, with Mr. Floyd's murder this summer, one of the things it established for me is that everyone needs to recognize that for so many people and for so many systems that we live in, there is this really strong belief that Black people aren't even human.
Right.
And I think that is definitely like the legacy of the transatlantic and the domestic slave trade, right? Is that we get to treat Black people in this manner because they're not entirely human in the first place. Right. So I think those two things, dismantling the racial hierarchy and also every opportunity we have to be brilliant in recognizing the fullness of our humanity, whether that's ratchet behavior or scholarly endeavor, we are fully human. And I think that that's something that a lot of people really need to come to grips with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that is how I see it. I think that Black August being celebrated this year is so important, right? I would love for you to, I feel like you've already taught me so much, but help me and the people who watch this video kind of understand what that means. I think there are still a lot of people who are just like, Black people be making up stuff now, right? So I would love for you to share more about what Black August is, maybe what it isn't, what does it mean for us now?
Yeah, so Black
August. And I'm putting myself on mute a lot because if I don't, I will end up completely like,
you're fine,
making you expand on everything. And I'm like, yes, tell me more. So this is my way of creating healthy boundaries.
I got you. So yeah, Black August, basically it started in California, in really Soledad prison. I don't know how many people have heard of the Soledad brothers or if you've heard of the Soledad brothers before, but they're called the Soledad brothers not because of their last name. People think like, oh, their last name was Soledad. No, that was the name of the prison. And it was the early 70s. And long story short, what happened, I actually did a lesson on this, like what Black August is, on my Patreon. But George Jackson was a Black man who was killed at the prison by a guard. And it really, there's like a big story to it, but and so sometimes with like this kind of stuff, I like don't say too much because I want people to go and like look it up, because I know that there's knowledge with that, right? So, but yeah, just George Jackson was an integral reason as to why Black August started. He was killed. Before that, his younger brother tried to like form this uprising. There's just a lot of stuff that went into it. So yeah, basically Black August began because of prison uprisings in California. And Black August really, though, gained traction in the mid to the late 1970s. The reason for that, I mean, there are many different reasons for that. Just really the resurgence, and I wouldn't say the resurgence of the Black Power movement from the mid 60s, but really the resurgence of like a Black Power 2.0. Because there's a period of history in America where we don't really hear about Black Power or civil rights, and it's usually from like 75 to like Rodney King. You don't hear much, but there's still a lot happening. There's a lot happening with like Black Power. We're still fighting for like civil rights, like Black feminism. There was so much going on, but yeah, I mean, Black August really is a way to focus on revolutionaries, freedom fighters, and those who either risked their lives, right? Like literally risked their lives fighting for our freedom. I mean, people like Marcus Garvey. I mean, again, wow, I just said his name, George Jackson. And you have people like, I mean, Huey Newton, Bobby, right? These Black people who are continuously seen as iconic. But also with that, I put other people into the category of Black August. And well, okay, sorry, let me back up. Another reason why too is because so many things happen in August. So a lot of things happen in August in history that have to do with Black people. Matter of fact, I really wish I had pulled up my list, because I have an entire list of things that happened in August. But I have.
Well, people can always go to your Patreon too. Shout out to your Patreon.
They can. I have a whole lesson about Black August. But yeah, I mean, Nat Turner's rebellion was in August. The NAACP was founded in August. James Baldwin, who's my favorite Black intellectual, he was born in August. The Fugitive Slave Law Convention happened in August. There's just like the Voting Rights Act was signed in August. So much happened in August, but also even to bring it to modern day, Mike Brown was killed in August, right? I mean, just yesterday, and Sunday night, we heard about Jacob Blake being shot multiple times just for being Black. And we're in August. Like, there's so many connections. And then you also have some people who passed away in August, like W.E.B. Du Bois, who, like, he passed away in August. So there's so much. And I don't think that there are coincidences with things like that. I think that there's some sort of divine intervention with that. And people might say, oh, but like, why would revolution and death and freedom fighting be about divine intervention? And I'm like, what divine intervention do you not know about? Because, right, I'm just like, that's how God is. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much. And I'm really glad that this year there's been a bigger focus on it, because yeah, people only know about February, like Black History Month, which is already annoying because it's the shortest month of the year. Already annoying, but really because of what's been happening in our country this year and what happened in our country this summer with like George Floyd. And then before that, okay, you had, like, we found out about like Breonna Taylor. Before that, like Ahmaud Arbery had already been hunted down, literally hunted down and killed by racist white supremacists. And then we found out about it months later, right? And so we're dealing with that. We're dealing with that racial trauma, that post-secondary trauma. And then boom, George Floyd happens. And it was just, and yes, people, and I'm gonna go into this for like a minute, but people were like saying stuff like, oh, well, I just think that it's just that people just started seeing more stuff and that's why they like care more. And I'm like, really? Because that's really not it, because Philando Castile's video was also passed around.
And don't forget Sandra Bland, right?
No,
Sandra
right?
Bland's video was the one where, and I just have to say this, that's when I was like, I'm not watching another one, right? Like that was it for me. I mean, not that I would rush to watch these videos, but Sandra Bland was the last one that I attempted because I was like, oh, right. So I bring that up to say, yeah, the footage has existed, you know, the footage has always existed.
It's always been here. And that's why I get really frustrated when people say things like, oh, well, the more you pass it around and more people see it, the more they're going to change. When has that ever saved Black people? Never. It's literally never saved us. I mean, you had people who had lynching spectacles who would take their food after they've been to church on a Sunday, and they would lynch Black people, and it'd be like an entertainment venue. And then afterwards, you would dismember the body and you would take souvenirs home. You would take the bloody rope home. You would let your kids burn the body, and then you would take these pictures and pass them around on postcards and flyers and pamphlets to brag to your other friends and wherever. And so when has that ever helped us, right? And so I do think, though, and I had to say that because yesterday was just exhausting with people sharing the video of Jacob Blake. I don't care what anyone says. Sharing does not. Why do we have to share a video for you to believe in our humanity and our right to live? That's not.
Yeah, and you know, I just have to add, because I didn't watch it.
No.
And we have some really good reporting that happens at this point where, like for example, with Mr. Floyd, I've been able to like read news that kind of tells you, you know, and even that's triggering.
Yep.
And I thought about this, Lettie, and this is not for our listeners. This is not something that Lettie and I plan to discuss. The Jacob thing is something that happened this week. But I was thinking about, every time there is a new video, right, there's like that self-reflection. You start thinking about, what does this mean for people who love him? And this is a man who we hope and pray exists, right? Like he can survive this. And I was thinking, what do these do? What do these do? Because you're right, like Black people hanging from trees never made a group of white people say, this is bad, right? Mm-mm. And I wondered to myself, what do we owe? Like, what do we owe the Sandras and the Mr. Floyds? And so anyway, I always have these moments where I'm like, well, should I watch it? Is this part of the collective lament? And then I always go back to the part of, but then what do I have to do to feel as safe as I possibly can in an anti-Black world, right? And so there's all these negotiations. And I thought what I landed yesterday, right, is like, there needs to be a testament, right? And I think in some ways there's two functions of those videos. So the one, there's a testament, it's a memorial in some ways, right? Not proof, you know, but it's a testament of the gross dehumanization, but it's also a testament of the people who survived to tell the story, that we managed to continue every day living and trying to process and trying to function, knowing that could be our story in some ways. But the second thing is, and this is what's so upsetting, is that these videos, for some people, also can create the artifact necessary to demand justice for their loved ones. You know? And so Do I wish we live in a world where the video didn't have to exist? Sure, but I know that that's naive.
Well, it's also naive because we have technology. Okay, so here's like how I think about it too, because I think the videos are trauma porn, because I'm like, what you're doing is you're already, because there's already, and I learned a lot about this in my conflict management and resolution grad program, my second master's that I just got. Like, there's not enough talk about trauma and what trauma really is. People think trauma is just rape, a car accident, something like that. They don't think trauma is stuff like watching a video of a Black person being shot and killed by a cop.
I agree. I think it is. I just want you to know this girl does.
Well, I feel like America's preconceived idea of what trauma is not that, because America also doesn't care about racism. So how is it going to be about that, right? And so then also my other thing is, yes, I see what you're saying about the video being a testament. My thing is, we just got phones like this that show these videos. We have access to media, instantaneous viewing of stuff. I wonder how many people watch these videos, right? And so it's, we just got this stuff. And so people are already going to receive it differently. And I think to myself, like, what would it have been like if we had iPhones and Androids during, or whenever Rodney King was murdered, right? Killed. So, and then I think, and I'm like, well, before media, before all this, people didn't need, Black people, didn't need to see the proof to know that injustice was happening. So, like, you think like the NAACP, right, being founded in the early 1900s, like they had an entire anti-lynching campaign, but they didn't see the lynchings of all, they didn't see every Black body. They probably didn't see really any, but they still fought for it, right? They still fought for racial justice. And so that's why, people bring it up to me, people who want to share it, who want people to see it. And I'm like, but is that why you think then people should give a damn about us dying, is seeing the video? And so then what if they don't see it though? So then if they don't see it, then that's just a reason to not believe us. And so that's because of deeper conversation, right, about racism. Because it always comes back to racism and not believing Black people and believing white people over Black people. That's what history's always been about in this country. You had Black people who were killed because of white lies. Matter of fact, my shirt says "White Lives Matter," and it's because it makes you think of history. And so, yeah, that's. I don't know how we got on the whole conversation with this, but it's really been. Yesterday was a really heavy day. My chest was tight yesterday morning. It was just a lot, because in all reality, right, it's what the people in history, and to bring it back to like Black August, the people in history that people today want to glorify, right? So you have, Fred Hampton, Angela Davis, Assata Shakur. Like, they were legit revolutionaries though. and they didn't just stop because something wasn't trendy anymore. So then you have to ask yourself, like, what are you really wanting to do? And what are you wanting to not admit that you don't want to have to work at and fight for? So yeah, I mean, I don't even know where I was going with that, but
it's okay. But I was also thinking, and those people that you named and all the people that haven't been named were also people who were doing that work in the face of racial trauma.
Yes.
And that kind of brings me to contemporary life, right? So like, like I said, I made a decision yesterday. I had been thinking about it over the weekend, because we're also in the process of like a presidential election. And I wouldn't say I'm a political buff, but I enjoy like reading about politics in the news. And the last week I haven't been, because I can't, the way that Kamala is being discussed, right? It's like, you know, I feel like Meg Thee Stallion got shot. I'm not laughing at Meg Thee Stallion got shot, but I'm bringing specific context into mind,
Yeah.
right? And then absorbing all the anti-Black women messages that was, right? And that was like even before she named her assailant. You know what I'm saying? Like when it first happened across the interwebs, everyone's like making jokes and making memes. And so I don't think people realize how, as a Black woman, right? I'm not Meg, I don't know the sister, but like seeing how her pain was made like a mockery of, that was deeply hurtful. And then we turn around and Kamala is named vice president, right? The candidate for vice president. And all of the direct and indirect ways people are sliding, right? Sliding her and dismissing her, but around her Black womanness, right? Like the very first night after her DNC speech, Trump comes out and he's like, she's just a nasty woman. She's the nastiest woman. And I know that that's a racial trope, right? Like I realize that that's calling upon a history and the histories of calling Black women angry and aggressive, right? And so I'm like dodging the news, right? So I'm dodging the shade room.
Yeah, right?
And now I'm dodging the news. And I'm like, when does it end? And so yesterday with Jacob, I was like, okay, yeah, so it's time to like take a pause again. And I think, and then all of this is happening in a global pandemic. And so one of the things I think people don't understand is just how petrified, like it's petrifying to be a Black woman, right? And I have the privilege of being like a cisgender Black woman too. So like, you get what I'm saying? Like there's safety in that for me, right? But I'm just like, it's petrifying. Like you're always, always, always reminded, what do the young people see? Like, how do they say you can get it, right? Like all the time, all of the ways you're endangered. And so we think about all of the people who did that work, that, like I said, those names you called, and they did it in the face of racial trauma. They just didn't have the language to say, right? And so it brings us to our now, and I'm like, you know, I've had a couple people say, oh, well, I guess like everything's over, no one's protesting, whatever, and it makes me pissed. And I'm like, if you can sit here and say that the movement is done, you are speaking from a place of privilege. There's no days off.
No.
Even when we try to take days off, right? Like the fact that we have to schedule to like try to have this self-care, and even then that's work, right? Because it's like, okay, I'm not gonna do this and I'm not gonna do this.
Yeah.
And so it's making me a little angry.
No, and I find people think, oh, well, it's just protesting. That's the only way to fight. And I'm like, no. Like that's not all that you need to be focusing on. And people see that, right? Because again, people looking at their phones. And I mean, I definitely experienced this summer because I like gained a whole bunch of followers on Instagram, which I'm very, very thankful for. I mean, thousands and thousands
Shout out to Lettie's Instagram followers.
Right? Yeah, I'm very grateful for all of them. And my Patreon is like skyrocketed. And I'm grateful for that too, because that's my passion. Like this is what I want to do. I want to educate about history in the way that I want to. Like I want to help people learn about racism and I want to. I don't want to be like told what I need to say or like not say. No. But even with that, it's like now I definitely have seen on social media how there hasn't been that much interaction and people aren't viewing the lives as much. And I mean, I'm still doing it because my work isn't contingent upon how many people are watching, right? Because that's not what I'm convicted about. I'm convicted to do the work, but I'm just like, this isn't trendy, right? Black Lives Matter is not trendy.
Even though it is on our shirts. And so I was like,
yeah, like it's just,
we have trendy shirts.
Right. Yeah. Like we've just been screaming about this for so long and like, yeah, like good for you for recognizing it now, but we've been here. Like I've been Black my whole life. Like this is like we were screaming Black Lives Matter whenever that phrase was actually coined back in 2013. I mean, and even before that. before that, Black Lives Matter was being said by all the activists that we can think of in history that are Black, because just because the phrase wasn't said doesn't mean that's not what they were advocating for, right? So, and that's why, again, understanding a more thorough picture about different groups and people in history is so necessary. It's kind of like even talking about the like Black Panther Party, right? People have this idea of, oh, they're militant, violent Black men who wanted to kill the cops. That is literally the furthest thing from the truth, right? And so then you have to ask yourself, like, who's writing that story? Why did the media paint them that way, right? Like, what else is going on? And then whenever you learn about the counterintelligence program that J. Edgar Hoover launched, COINTELPRO, and you learn that it was actually had really technically been in existence before 1966. That's what they want to say, but Dr. King was being followed right in the 50s. So Malcolm X was being followed, like John Lewis was being followed, James Baldwin was being followed. Like, it's just they've been there, right, spying and trying to put their informants in everything to disrupt and discredit and like these Black movements. And so, like, you know, people look at the Panthers and they're like, oh, well, that's just what they were. They were just violent. No, they didn't even start for that reason. Actually, they evolved in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Huey Newton, Stokely Carmichael, like they evolved from the Civil Rights Movement. What happened was after the Voting Rights Act, like there was still a lot of
of 1965. Just want to give some kind of like signpost there.
Yeah, I'm like, y'all, that's still like there was still a lot of stuff happening, and the Panther Party really. They even had like a rainbow coalition, which basically meant that they had Black people. They had what they called yellow people, who would have been Asian Americans. They had white people who were like in this coalition, not in the Black Panther Party, kind of Black Panther Party, but the Rainbow Coalition, which was an aside from their party, like because what they were fighting was capitalism and oppression, and because those are the foundations to like even to
oh my gosh, Lettie, now you're gonna have the feds following us.
I am. I'm sure I'm already on like some hit list or something.
I feel like I'm on that list too.
I honestly think that I am. I mean, at this point, if I'm not, you know, I'd be shocked. Because the conversation
I'll call you later and tell you what made me think that I was on the list. There was a very specific thing that occurred, but that's neither here or there.
Okay. Wow.
So Rainbow Coalition.
But yeah, like they were for like fighting racism, like all people fighting racism. They wanted like to end oppression, right? And so people leave that whole part out. They leave out the whole part about like the FBI going into like places and just shooting and killing Panthers. They leave out all of that. They don't mention that stuff. See, they don't talk about the Black women who were the backbone of the party, like Kathleen Cleaver, Assata Shakur. Just two of them.
Kind of after all, and I think that's really powerful, right? Because, we know that history is often written by the winners.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we see now what we didn't see before, right? I don't know the exact date, but I remember when I found out like the truth behind Rosa Parks' direct action on that Montgomery bus. I was wowed.
Yeah.
Because again, growing up, the way that story was framed for me, even in school, was here is this Black maid, and she was just real tired that day, y'all, right? And she was frumpy, and she just couldn't figure out how to go on. And then to find out later that here's this woman who's majorly connected, right?
Yes.
NAACP leader, had been a student of nonviolent direct action for years, right? Yep. Had practiced this, right?
Yeah.
And in community building. And I'm like, this wasn't accidental.
Nope. Yeah.
And we don't want to get too far into this when we start. That might have to be another video for us to do. But the fact remains that there was a decision to And you know, like I said, this is interesting because we can debate about this all the time. Was that the best thing to rally around Dr. King and make him that focal period to make, right? Like, that's a whole different conversation. But there was this decision, this like collective decision to minimize what Black women were doing in that moment. You know what I'm saying? And so as a Black woman, to know that Rosa was intentional, that was planned, that's been so empowering.
Yeah.
And the work that we've been doing with the Anti-Blackness reader, right? You know, I think to myself, I definitely don't want to seem like, because I get a I get a lot of flack sometimes, Lettie, because I do center Black women, and in a lot of ways that's because I'm a Black woman, right? And that feels authentic to me. But strategically, I do that too, because I think to myself, you know, when we think about the modern civil rights movement, and if Malcolm X and MLK is who we land on, then we're only telling part of the story, right? And if we don't tell the story of, you know, the Daisy Bates, if we don't tell the story of all these amazing Black women, then we're still only getting one part of it, right? Like, you know, if white histories constantly center white men and don't tell about all the other things that people of color contributed, what happens within our Black community if our histories still only center Black men and don't talk about the works that Black women X and Black women have established towards freedom? So could you speak to that? Like, what do you think is the impact of Black women not being negotiated in these stories? And where do we still have to go in terms of acknowledging Black women X in our freedom fighting?
Yeah, I mean, my mind was spinning while like you were talking.
I said a lot. I'm sorry. I got super
You're good. I'm gonna try to get back through it all. So like even with like what you said about Rosa Parks, right? And there's a whole conversation about why Rosa Parks was chosen to be the face of the Montgomery bus boycott. Versus Claudette Colvin, right? Who also sat on a bus, and people don't know that. But see, Claudette
Is
Colvin,
that part where we start talking about colorism, or no?
Yeah, like
right?
I mean, not here because that's literally an entire hour-long conversation.
We can't do it all in the video. We can't do it all in the
But
video.
like that's the stuff, right? And it even that kind of thing though makes me think directly about like Megan Thee Stallion. Okay, and I will tell you why. Because yes, it's colorism, and it also goes into a conversation with why don't we believe Black women who are not light-skinned? And what does that aesthetic tell us about whiteness? And not that Black women are white. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is like the visual, right?
Well,
like,
that's that racial hierarchy again too, right?
Yeah. And yeah, like how Rosa Parks was like a Christian, like older woman, or not older, but older. Like,
but she wasn't 15.
Right. And she wasn't 15 and hadn't gotten pregnant by an older man. And so it didn't fit the storyline well enough. And so, I mean, there are a ton more factors that would go into it. But what happens though is it's the same narrative that America wants to continue for Black women. So Black women historically have been the backbone of I mean, and I can go into so much, and I kind of am stammering because I have so much to say.
Yeah,
but
your brain is like doesn't want to go overdrive.
There's so much, but like Black women were the ones who had to abandon their children in order to nurse the white children whenever they were enslaved. Black women were the ones who cooked and cleaned and like and tended to their children and their enslavers' children. And Black women are they're the ones that we're the ones who have done it. And that's not to say that collectively Black people in history have not fought, right? That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it paints this image of Black women being not being strong, right? Black women only being good for sex. That's the narrative they want to paint, because that's what they wanted you to think about Black women during enslavement. Whenever you had these stereotypes of like the Jezebel And that stereotype, oh, well, it's because Black women are they just want sex all the time. When really what it was, right, was it was the racist enslaver or his son or his cousin or his uncle or whoever they invited over to the house who wanted to go and just rape Black women. But they had to find a way to make themselves look okay and to degrade Black women. Well, Black property as they saw it. And it's just, all of that goes into even today with what we hear about Kamala Harris, right? Like the rhetoric we hear about her about being a nasty woman.
Yes.
And whenever you look at things in between that, right? I mean, even I can even go as far as like the 1930s and Black women in the South, in Georgia, Black women in Pennsylvania, Black women in New York trying to find jobs. And many of these Black women who were up north got there through the Great Migration. And what it looked like for a Black woman to try to work, how Black women continued to be degraded. I had to take care again of the white children, could not go home to their children. It's a repeated pattern. And it continues to perpetuate the message that Black women are a problem, Black women cause trouble, Black women are loud, and Black women are undeserving and unworthy. And that's completely false. That's the furthest thing from the truth, and it pisses me off so much.
So it's like our labor counts, but only when it can be framed a certain way.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And that way it could be like passive as opposed to being an active agent. I just want to take this moment, say their names. I want to take a moment to think about someone like Georgia Gilmore, who discussed this week. But right, like I could only imagine how many chicken legs she fried, how many plates she created and sold so that Dr. King could have gas money.
Yep.
And I think about the harms that have been done because that narrative doesn't exist.
Right.
Not reinforcing Black women cooking fried chicken, but what I'm saying is, if we can't understand, if we can't connect the dots about, again, seeing Black people holistically as fully human, if we just tell one side of the story where Martin Luther King just shows up to the mountaintop and we don't include all of the partners that work to get him up there, then I feel like you said, we're kind of like destined to repeat really harmful cycles, right?
Yeah, and then it also comes to the question, and we don't have to get into this, but I am going to say it on here. Whenever it comes to like Black women being left out, right? Like he's writing that, and Black men taking the credit and all this stuff, right? It goes back like Megan Thee Stallion and how many people were like the reactions that she got.
Yes.
And so the bigger question too is, why y'all hate Black women so much? And that like hits people hard, and people get real defensive. And they're like, oh, we don't hate Black women. And I'm like, I'm not asking you that for you to answer it to me. I'm literally asking you that for you to sit with it and really look deep into the layers of what that question means. Like, why do you hate Black women? Because there's no reason. Like not no reason. What's the explanation then to get the feedback that Megan Thee Stallion got? And she's like, that's violence. That's
it is.
And it's
that's intercommunal. That's intercommunal violence.
Yes.
And I don't think we even know how to reckon with it, right? Like some of those responses were like, well, she snitched. And
like, so is that a reason for someone to get shot?
Well, also, what are the ways that we treat silence like a commodity, even at the expense of our own protection, right? Which I feel like we've already, like, that's another video too, right? Like silence is a commodity,
right. And then it goes into
that's dangerous.
Yeah, and then it goes into like an even deeper conversation about like trauma. Why? And this was actually probably my favorite thing in my recent program that I finished, but I read a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And
yes, it's I need like 3 Kinas, and I need 1 Kina who just reads all the book that is on Kina's list.
I need a Lettie who just reads, and that's it. Actually, I need a Lettie that just reads books, and then a Lettie that just reads articles, academic articles, because they're like 70 pages.
Okay, well, let me add. So I need a Kina who reads books, a Kina who reads scholarship, and then a Kina who listens to podcasts.
Right. Oh my gosh, me too. I need a Lettie that does that. Oh my God, I'm the same. I need it because honestly, there's not enough hours. Oh, and then like 3 more of me to do what I do because it's just not enough. But yeah. And at the same time that I was reading that book, I was reading Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And so reading them
Dr. Joy is amazing.
Yes. And it was great to read them both together because I actually never read that book. And I don't even know why. It was just on my shelf. I just never read it. And I finally got around to reading it, and I read it with that book, and it was just so eye-opening how many things as a Black person I was like, dang, that was me growing up. Dang, that was my parents. That's how I got treated. And so there's a bigger conversation with the Black community of the fact that, like, this is why I said at the beginning, is America doesn't understand what trauma really is. They see it as just the physical. They don't understand that trauma gets passed down the same way that your inherited teeth get passed down, the same way that blue eyes get passed down, the same way that
Lettie, I mean, the when it dawned on me, and I don't know the text that broke it down, right? But it was like my grandmother held my mom.
Mm-hmm.
My mom held me, right?
I think that's in Joy DeGrye's book. I think that is.
But epigenetics. But you get what I'm saying? So like, there's 4 generations. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, yeah.
And that's why I'm like, people don't understand the depth of trauma. Yeah. Trauma is even like not getting the emotional needs that you needed as a child. That's traumatic. That's not like, that's just how you were raised. Oh, that's just hurt feelings. No, it's traumatic. And then you end up growing up being like having these emotional issues. And I'm gonna be very, very like transparent here. Like, I see a therapist. I have a Black therapist, and
I have a Black therapist too that I need to schedule an appointment with.
I have one Friday, girl. I got an appointment Friday because like, and it's just, there's so much. And there's a stigma on mental health already. There's a stigma on mental health in the Black community, right? It was always growing up, if anyone ever went to see a therapist, it was,
some white people stuff.
Right? It was like, oh, you're crazy. Oh, well, that person's crazy. No, they're a human being. Like, they have feelings, they got neglected, they had this, they had that, but also stepping back to enslavement. Like, my great grandmother who was enslaved, her eggs, like the same thing like you were saying, that trauma is passed down. And that's why there are connections that I've made to so many things with how we as Black people, and I'm not trying to say that we're all the same, because we are not.
We are not a monolith.
No, right. And I hate people that act like we are, and I'm like, we're not. I'm not Candace Owens, please don't. But I am just like, if like I were to go today, I mean, matter of fact, when me and you first talked, we just like were clicking on so many things, because collectively, Black culture is collective. It just is. And
especially when we think about being part of the diaspora.
Yes.
Because our very existence in this land starts from collectively being chained together. Yeah. And then we think about the domestic slave trade, and then here we are, chained together, moved across the United States. So much of how we have experienced Blackness in the Western world is through togetherness, right?
Yeah, no.
And I just have to put this out there, because we'll have to return to this. And this is why this nucleus exists in my head. I also need a Kina who's always writing, so that's neither here or there. But we start thinking about when or if Black people can be safe together, right? Because of everything we experience together is so what is the common thread that unites us? People think it's our dancing or music, but I say it's trauma, right? If there's nothing else. And how shitty is that?
Yep.
Right? I do feel like we have like 7 episodes of your podcast. Like,
no, but that was really good.
Like, return to that conversation.
But that is really good, because also America's never cared about our trauma. America still doesn't care. I mean,
no, because everyone decided. No, but so this is the thing. This is a conversation I've been having, which is now that people believe racism is real, now it's not because Black people said it, right?
Nope.
And that's a. I feel like we've said like that's a whole nother conversation 18 times.
There was some type of Robin DeAngelo's of like the world. And I'm like, okay. When did she ever experience racism? Never, because she's white. So there's that.
Why you hate? Look, that woman is number 1 on the best.
Girl, look. And that's the thing, right? I tell people, I'm like, I've read her book. I have. Matter of fact, everyone that I've talked to that criticizes her has read.
This is not on the list of things. So we are freestyling here. Go ahead on, sis. Go ahead on.
I mean, like, honestly, if we're going to talk about, right, like, revolutionary Black August, the important thing to constantly do with history is to look at what else is happening on the flip side, right?
Yes.
So why right now, if we're in this revolutionary time, which it is a revolutionary time. It is. Yeah. What's happening in our country right now is revolutionary time, and in 50 years, it'll be in the history books. It absolutely will.
Yeah.
Why then, in this revolutionary time, are y'all reading more white people and less Black people? I mean, if we're going to talk about it, right?
Why is the go-to in this moment a white middle-aged woman?
Hello. And let me also say, I do understand that, like, people have had their eyes opened from reading her book. I do get that. People are like, oh, I actually realized some things reading her book, and it led me, like, to social media, and I found you, and I found so-and-so. That's great. Don't read the book ever again. Read things by Black people, because if you really want to understand and know about racism, how racism affects us, you cannot learn that from a white person.
You know, yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. And I'm just gonna stop right there because
we're just gonna stop.
We'll never get off the line. Look, the last thing I want to talk to you about is where do we go from here, right? And I actually think that's a good place, right? Where do we go from here in terms of understanding Black freedom fighting? Because, like you said, I think 50 years from now, this moment. A lot of people are calling it movement for Black lives, right? That's why it was so important for me with the Anti-Blackness Reader Project to really kind of say, hey, y'all, this work has been happening for eons in so many different ways with so many different instruments, right? So where do we go from here? And what should we be learning? Who should we support? Who should we be supporting? Where should we be leaning right now in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I say, like, as far as where to go from here, I want people to not stop doing the work. Like, I want people to know that, and I know I've said this several times before already in this, like, this is not a trend. This is not trendy. This is not just like a maybe. This is not just because you were at home during coronavirus and you had more time on your hands and you were just more active on social media and your emotions were already high because you're stressed out, so you were more receptive to Black people dying. No. That feeling is how we feel all the time. And I really need people to just know that. And also know that whenever it comes to Black freedom fighting in particular, what you're seeing happening is Black freedom fighting. It means that we are out here engaging in civil disobedience. And it means that civil disobedience, whenever you want to glorify people like Dr. King, I need y'all to go read the entire letter from a Birmingham jail. Because whenever he talks about just and unjust laws, he talks about that and how breaking unjust laws is exactly what he always did. And those unjust laws are the same laws that you see people peacefully going against today. The people who become violent are the ones who come to protest with weapons, who are the cops. And that's what America needs to start opening its freaking eyes to, because America doesn't want to open its eyes to that, because it never has, right? It never has. What they've always shown as the ones with the weapons and the guns are the angry black men, the Panthers, whoever. Y'all, I've been to protest this year. You want to know who showed up with riot gear and weapons? The cops. And that's why when we talk about revolution and freedom fighting, that truly means freedom. It doesn't mean the white America freedom. It doesn't mean the freedom that white people want it to be to fit into their little patriotic box. No, freedom.
And capitalistic box too. Don't forget that. Like, because for some people, freedom is freedom to just buy more shit.
Yes. No, yes. Sorry, I have to turn my screen around. My husband's coming in and I don't want it to be loud. But sorry. But yeah, I mean, that's also what we mean by freedom fighting, is what it means for black people. Like freedom fighting for black people, not freedom fighting for like what you want your white supremacist America to continue to allow. And that makes people real uncomfortable whenever I say it, but I say it anyway, because it just helps people see like what this country's really done and what this country's really about. And it's not about preserving black lives and being mindful of us. But with that doesn't mean that the first thing people should do is say like, oh, you're just being divisive. Oh, you're just trying to stir up trouble. No, but that's American history. This is the American history that we all did not learn. And now that you're learning this American history, and now that you're becoming more aware, I hope, of what's really going on, you've got to understand that like it's going to be uncomfortable for you. You're not going to be centered. You're not going to be sitting here like, okay, well, everything's fine and great, blah, blah, blah. So.
And that's white people being centered, right? White people are going to lose that centering. Yeah.
Right.
What do I'm going to make a comment and then I'm going to give you the last word here. So like I said, in the last few years after Trayvon Martin's death, I've been relearning history and reinserting Black truth to it. And so even finding out how many Black people were involved in fighting in the Revolutionary War, right? And what I think is amazing is that in some ways they've worked really hard to center whiteness, to center white maleness, and to leave us to the sides. And I wonder what would happen if there had been more of a holistic view of the Black story, even growing up. Because maybe then I would feel more like the fabric, like a part of the fabric of America, if I saw myself in all the ways that Black people have existed in this country and not just being dehumanized as slaves. So as a Black person, I always want to encourage other Black people. We're there and we are in these stories in dynamic, full ways. So what would you say to Black people in terms of their relationship to history, whether we're talking local, national, globally? What would you tell Black people?
And I mean, first thing that came to mind was like, don't be ashamed of it. Like, don't be ashamed of our history. Our history was taught to us like we were these weak and just like not strong, just very timid people who were just very like, just said yes to our master. And that's not who we were. That's not who we were. We resisted in so many ways. Small things like working slower, choosing to learn in secret, like actually to go back, bringing over to America our our Africanness. And I know that's not even a word, but I don't ever know how else to say it except that, right? Like just bringing over like who we really are. And a lot of what, if you take time to ever look at African history, and I have not studied it, but I've had to obviously read much of it because of the history that I've studied, but also like you'll see parallels with what we do in our country as Black people today, right? And it's just really neat to see it, especially with like like spirituality, remedies, like just little things that like we do. But yeah, not to be ashamed of our history, and to also know that there's much more in our history than just being enslaved. And that's why I correct people whenever they say slaves. I'm like, enslaved. We were not slaves. We were stolen and we were enslaved. Like that, slaves, that was not our identity at all. It was not our identity. We were enslaved people. And I just want people to see, Black people to see how much we fought, like how much we definitely did overcome. Yes, how much we had to endure. And yes, we see the dark history. We see the lynchings, and we see like, yeah. But what people also don't talk about is like the Great Migration and how that was resistance and traveling, and how Black people who had their homes listed in the Green Book as locations for people to stop and eat and sleep or whatever, like that was Black community looking out for Black community, right? That was somebody opening up like maybe their place. Matter of fact, in Wilmington, North Carolina, like 10 minutes from me, there were about 40 different Green Book locations, maybe, or actually, yeah, and there were places listed, like there was a place called Germany's Beauty Parlor, but if you drive past where it was actually just someone's house. It was just someone's house, but it was listed as a beauty parlor. But what that was, and I envision it, was like a Black woman who opened up her kitchen floor to do hair, or her porch to do hair, or wherever it was. Because if you think about how we do hair, I mean, at least me growing up, it was sitting between my mom's legs. It was sitting in
front of a stove.
Yeah, in front of a stove, exactly. And so that, like, Black people opening up their homes to strangers who were Black people, trying to have bodily autonomy in a country that did not want them to be people and not want them to be free. They were still traveling, still having fun, still living, right? That too was resistance. And we wouldn't even have a lot of the Black people that we know of in history had it not been for the Great Migration. Like at least half of them we would never even know about. So yeah, and also to know that like history's always shown us that Black lives don't matter, but we've continuously fought and said Black lives matter, especially recently and in the last 7 years. But our ancestors said it too. They just didn't say that. But people fought, right? Like we should remember John Lewis, right? You know, he recently passed away, and I was so hurt by that. But people like him who did fight for us and shed blood for us, that's why I've asked a lot recently, like, what are you doing to get into good trouble? Because John Lewis didn't mean the good, safe trouble. Because when people hear the word good, they think, oh, good, like don't cause trouble. No, he meant trouble that's going to cause something drastic to happen in a positive way for Black people. So, yeah.
Well, Lettie, thank you so much. We are so excited about you taking the time out to be with us today and to record. So again, we can find Lettie everywhere. Her podcasts are featured on Spotify, Apple. There's probably other useful places podcasts are. I just don't know about them because I'm not that cool. You can find Lettie on Facebook and Instagram. And so we are so excited. Shout out to everyone who is still committed to laboring, whether you're Black, non-Black. The work is always ongoing. I'm officially petitioning Lettie to be a guest on her podcast now, because I feel like you got 18 ideas today that we could grow from.
I know.
So that's me like shooting my shot.
No, yeah, I'm
shooting your shot. Like, is it just like romantic, or can like we shoot our shots like, you know what I'm saying? For
I say that for all kinds of stuff. Oh yeah, I say that for everything.
Well, that was me shooting my shot. Stay well.
You
Continue
too.
to do good things and get in good trouble.
Yes, same.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.